Check out the latest footwear innovation from Adidas, the Adizero Adios Pro 2, which features carbon fiber energy rods that are both lightweight and precisely tuned for a more anatomical transition. Everything from the ultra-light polyester upper to the re-sculpted midsole and the reinvented outsoles are designed for speed. Visit adidas.com to learn more today. Check out the latest footwear innovation from Adidas, the Adizero Adios Pro 2, which features carbon fiber energy rods that are both lightweight and precisely tuned for a more anatomical transition. Everything from the ultra-light polyester upper to the re-sculpted midsole and the reinvented outsoles are designed for speed. Visit adidas.com to learn more today.
Hey everybody, Tony Gerdeman here. You guys know from time to time we like to throw a couple of other shows onto this feed to give you guys an example of what else we have on the Buckeye Scoop Podcast Network. This is an episode of the Big Me Kickoff from Kevin Noon, the newest show here on the network. Kevin had the college football nerds on with him this week. They take an analytical look at the Ohio State defense, a little bit at the Ohio State offense, and break some things down for you. So give it a listen. And if you enjoy the show, go ahead and subscribe to the Big Me Kickoff via your whatever podcast platform you use. Just go ahead and do a search on the Buckeye Scoop or a Big Me Kickoff, and you should find it there. Subscribe, and you'll get that sent to your inbox or your platform whenever Kevin drops a new episode, which is just about every week. So give it a listen, and we will talk to you guys later.
Hey, welcome to the Big Me Kickoff, not the Big Noon Kickoff. I don't want to get the Fox attorneys after us, but I'm your host, Kevin Noon, and it's the Big Me Kickoff here only on BuckeyeScoop.com. It is Friday. We are a day out from the Tulsa game, and nobody wants to talk about Tulsa. Everybody wants to talk about Ohio State, Oregon. What's wrong with the Ohio State defense? I mean, even some people out there saying that, maybe we don't even know the full picture on the offense. So we're going to talk about all these things. And I want to bring in a good friend of mine through the years, and that's the guys over at College Football Nerds. We've got Josh joining us. And Josh, welcome to the big show.
Thanks. I'm happy to be on here.
First and foremost, you guys put on one of my favorite podcasts out there. I watch you guys as much as I can. Sometimes some of the SEC games I don't care as much about. I don't watch those shows. But tell everybody how they can check out your guys' material, and then we're going to talk more specifically about Ohio State.
So our channel is focused on really an analytical approach to college football. Myself and my partner Daniel both have engineering and science backgrounds, sort of expanded on to other things in our careers, but we find ourselves looking at football from the angle of something approaching Moneyball, but let's call it cautioned Moneyball. There's a certain amount of predictability in college football in terms of how you can evaluate who is an elite and a non-elite program. And there's a certain amount of football that's highly variable, things that change game to game. And what we like to do is come up with our own theories and hypotheses for what's going on in a game, but actually try to back it up with real world data. And then starting in week 4, which is next week for us, we start to run computer models to talk about where we think each team lies. And it's highly, in our case, matchup based, because college football is really a competition level sport, competition driven sport. And I don't think you can really view anything in the sport absent talking about who your opponent is, how things work, and realizing that statistics are often driven by the level of competition. You can find us at CFB Nerds on Twitter. We're also College Football Nerds on YouTube and on Spotify and other podcast platforms. We cover lots of games nationally, focusing on the Big Ten, SEC, and everything in between.
Well, let's get right into Ohio State. And I guess the most simplistic question I could just ask is, what's wrong with Ohio State? But, let me preface that and dial it down a little bit more, because that's just the widest question I could ask. I mean, Ohio State's sitting at 1-1. Opens on the road at Minnesota, not the most impressive win in the world, but a win's a win. And then they go as the number 3-4 team, and they lose at home to Oregon in a game that Ohio State trailed by 14-7 throughout various points. Ohio State came in as a 14-point favorite, just, a lot of deficiencies on defense, maybe some deficiencies on offense, even though I think we're all focusing on the defense. Before we, really get into one particular or another, just as somebody who is an unimpassioned observer, what is it that you see? What do the numbers kind of say? I know it's a little bit early for the model to be coming out, but, what do you see from your analytical side of this?
Every time you lose a football game, it's a combination of a number of different factors, right? You can always pin it on the offense or the defense or the competition level. And the truth is, it's always a combination of the three. If you shut everyone out, then you're never going to lose a game. If you score every time you have the ball, you're never going to lose a game. And if you play weak competition, you're never going to lose. So in this case, I think it was a combination of playing a couple teams that have genuinely good rushing attacks. In Oregon's case, a good defense. And defensively from Ohio State, you're seeing issues stopping the run. I think you're seeing a lot of schematic issues. Our channel has been very vocal about our concerns with Ohio State scheme. We started that even leading into the Indiana game last year, and coming out of the game, we were very concerned in the playoffs about what we saw as some real limitations against high-level teams. But I think offensively, maybe the thing that a lot of people are potentially missing is that the yardage totals from Ohio State really aren't yardage totals that efficiently generate scoring. And we can talk about that a little bit, that not only, from the obvious perspective, you have a game where Ohio State has 612 yards of offense and they score 28 points. That's something ideally you don't want to happen. And it's the combination of the two. It's a defense that allows an Oregon offense to score 35 and an offense that, despite their yardage, isn't putting up nearly the points they should, that I think kind of coalesce into Ohio State having real concerns.
We were talking, and I guess we'll start with the offense here because I think the defense is the bigger dragon to slay. We were talking off air a little bit about EPA and maybe some other instances of where, we like to talk about moving the ball between the 20s but not being able to punch it in. And I think we saw some examples of that in this game of where Ohio State had some of that, yardage that was insignificant. I think of at the end of the half, Ohio State, instead of, was able to snap the ball with 1 second, instead of taking a shot downfield, throw something a little bit more underneath and, pick up 20 yards or whatever. But I mean, it wasn't going to get anywhere short of a major hook and ladder type of play.
Right. One of the things that happens a lot in current college football is that teams play a little more bend but don't break. And it's really due to the RPO era, right? When they made that change in 2009, where an offensive lineman can block all the way up to 3 yards. Used to be you had to be engaged within a yard and you could carry up to 3 yards. And now it's just straight, can be up to 3 yards downfield. It opened up this RPO concept. And what that effectively does is it breaks keys defensively. If I'm a safety, I don't know if it's run or pass. So I really can't read run or pass and react. I have to have an assignment and carry it all the way through the play. For a long time, people didn't really change their approach, and people would key run because they'd see linemen go downfield and they'd give up a big play. Now teams essentially are just assuming it's a pass, and they're keeping the defense back, and they're making a lot of concessions, particularly in run defense and even in pass defense. An approach that I think Clemson sort of maybe pioneered, at least on a large scale, was the approach that inside the 20, we're going to play our normal defense, but everything outside that, we're going to really, do bend but don't break. We're going to give light numbers in the box, and we're going to let you get yardage underneath. And I think statistically that showed up for Ohio State in this game. I mean, Ohio State had 612 yards of offense. Yeah. And if you got 612 yards of offense, you'd expect to score more than 28 points. One of the stats that people have developed to look at how yardage translates to points in a game is EPA, or estimated points added. And what that does is it looks at the yardage you got on a play, but then it evaluates it based off down, distance, and position on the field and kind of gives a point total. I think it's a pretty helpful statistic. I'm not necessarily an evangelist of it, in part because I think it's a little tough to understand and it's not opponent adjusted. But if you look at it versus yards per play, it tells a very different picture, particularly in this game. I mean, Ohio State had 4.1 yards per carry, which is a decent number. But in terms of EPA, it was actually -2, meaning the total cumulative amount of those runs almost took points off the board for Ohio State. And likewise, Ohio State dominated in the passing game, 484 yards of offense to 236 passing. But in terms of estimated points added, it was about 13.8 to 6.8. Really only a touchdown better than Oregon, despite doubling their yardage. And the reason is that Ohio State was allowed to gain yardage between the 20s, but the yardage that matters, which is really inside the 40-yard line and especially inside the 20-yard line, Oregon was absolutely dominant. Oregon moved the ball very well in the red zone. Ohio State tend to buckle in the red zone, and in key plays where they needed to get conversions, they had a lot more difficulty. And I think that really comes down to Oregon's strategy being, hey, we need to win by limiting you to points, not limiting you on yardage. And that's a problem with every RPO approach. And I think, I'll go back to this one point. In the RPO era, if you're a high-level offense, you can get large numbers of yards. And I think defenses are understanding that. But the thing that distinguishes you as an offense in today's game is really your red zone scoring efficiency and your third down conversion percentage. Because lots of empty yardage on big plays, either the run or the pass, don't mean anything if you don't turn it into points. And if teams can make you get to the red zone, where at that point you don't have the RPO because you can't get behind the defense and you don't really have room to run it, they can play their standard defense, and now those advantages start to go away and they play normal defensive ball. I think that's what Oregon did in this game to Ohio State's offense. And I think a lot of CJ Stroud's numbers, as good as they are reflective of those open field, big shot plays. And in the red zone where it matters, the lack of an effective run game and the lack of efficiency from Stroud in the red zone are what's really hurting Ohio State on the scoreboard where it matters.
Check out the latest footwear innovation from Adidas, the Adizero Adios Pro 2, which features carbon fiber energy rods that are both lightweight and precisely tuned for a more anatomical transition. Everything from the ultra-light polyester upper to the resculpted midsole and the reinvented outsoles are designed for speed. Visit adidas.com to learn more today. Check out the latest footwear innovation from Adidas, the Adizero Adios Pro 2, which features carbon fiber energy rods that are both lightweight and precisely tuned for a more anatomical transition. Everything from the ultra-light polyester upper to the resculpted midsole and the reinvented outsoles are designed for speed. Visit adidas.com to learn more today.
The perfect campaign needs the perfect music. That's why Premium Beat tracks are produced by award-winning musicians at world-class studios. Plus, our license gives you tracks for a lifetime. Pay once and never again. Save 25% on your next track at premiumbeat.com/royalty-free/podcast.
Yeah, and when you sit there and you look, I mean, it certainly looks like Ohio State got away from the run game pretty early. I think if you sit there and you look at it as a season, Ohio State had that one long Mayan Williams touchdown, 70-plus yards, and then you take that out and they're averaging about 4.6 per carry. But then when they only have a handful of carries against Oregon, how much do you see that being an issue in terms of when they get into the red zone and it's you're passing on 3 downs at that point because you've completely walked away from the run?
It's definitely a problem. I mean, 31 carries or touches to 54 passes is not necessarily a great stat. Something that we've tracked a lot on our channel is teams that have a dual threat quarterback often have problems wherein you end up with a disproportionate amount of statistics to go through the quarterback. A lot of Alabama's biggest struggles with Jalen Hurts came on games where Hurts would have 25 passes but also 15 carries. And they had what was a great stable of running backs, and they'd have 20 carries between them. But when you did the math, it was like 40 to 20, 40 to 25. Here, Stroud hasn't been asked to run the ball much, but he's still asked to carry what I think is a really almost ridiculous shoulder of the load. I mean, 59 touches to 26 touches for Williams and Henderson. I just don't think it's realistic or going to get the job done. Ohio State has to be better at running the ball, has to be better at establishing the run. But to a certain degree, I really think Oregon just dictated things with their numbers. They, sort of said, hey, we're going to put people in the box. We're going to make Stroud beat us. And at times he does, but at times he didn't. And in particular, I mean, Ohio State's, failure to make a play tended to happen where it was most impactful, be it a conversion or scoring opportunity. And it was something we talked about out of the Minnesota game. It's easy to look at those stats and be really wowed by it. But the problem is when you're throwing with that kind of volume, efficiency starts to become highly important, because if I run for 4 or 5 yards a carry and I do it every carry, I score every time. If I can guarantee 4 yards every time I run the ball, I can do it 3 plays in a row and get a first down every time. If I'm passing at even a 60% clip, the odds of me having 2 incompletions in a row are decently high, right? And let's say I run for 4 yards on first down, and then, I may be getting 12 yards every completion, but if I'm only getting a completion 2 out of 3 times, there's going to be a decent amount of times where I string 2 incompletions in a row. So I go, 4 yards, 12 yards, 12 yards, and then 4 yards, incomplete. And I may have covered, 8, doing math in my head, which is a bad idea, but like 32 yards. So I may be averaging 6-7 yards a play, but I still end up punting. And I think that's kind of where Ohio State's problem is right now offensively. It's consistency and efficiency in moving the chains.
Yeah, there were certainly several drives. I remember Ohio State going incomplete on first, rushing for 2 on second, and then you're off schedule. You're at 3rd and 8. And as you said, if you go incomplete, I mean, you're punting at that point. Some penalties kind of cropped up and hurt Ohio State as well. A questionable holding call on Thayer Munford in the 4th quarter, a couple of false starts earlier in the game. But, with all of that being said, I don't think as many Ohio State fans are complaining about where the offense is compared to where the defense is. And now we really open the door to a situation of where, even in some of Ohio State's bad defensive years, which have been very few and far between, it's been against the pass. They've been able to stop the run, and teams have thrown against them. Right now, Ohio State can't stop either. And if anything, it's worse against the run. When you sit there and you see what CJ Verdell was able to do, what you saw that Mo Abraham was able to do the week prior, a lot. Kerry Combs, defensive coordinator, under a tremendous amount of fire here. The expectations from a lot of people are that he will not be calling the defense. Just from a mile-high view, what's wrong with the Ohio State defense in what you see, whether it be the numbers or what you see with your own eyes?
I think the problem with the defense, and we just tweeted about that and sort of in conjunction with other groups, the problem for the defense is an over-reliance on what I would call like man zone principles and man matchup principles, wherein Ohio State is letting the other team dictate the defensive alignment. And then within those principles, they're not quite good enough to execute. Now, as I said, we've been critical of the approaches that they take for some time, dating back to the Indiana game. And the reason is that when you are that straight man in your the way you do your coverage responsibilities and the way you do your assignments, it puts a tremendous amount of strain on every player on the field. Ross Fulton of Buckeye Scoop put out an article. We ended up retweeting it and sort of elaborating on it. There were a lot of times in that Oregon game where Oregon would do, like an unbalanced line. And what I mean by that is they'd have 2 receivers to the top of the field. It would be a trip set, but those 2 receivers at the top would both be on the line of scrimmage. So one's not an eligible receiver, but you still got 2 or 3 guys out there. And if they were to throw a bubble screen, you don't want to end up in a situation where you got a 2-on-1. So they would line a guy up in man coverage over the top. Well, if you do that, then that sort of dictates who you have available in the rest of the field. And again, Coombs would tend to stick guys in straight man coverage. So, you drag the tight end across the formation and the safety follows him. And now all of a sudden you've got an extra corner on one side of the field. So you've took the corner that maybe should have been on the left and you moved him to the right to deal with a trips formation. And then they'll have the tight end on the other side of the field motion. And maybe you pull the safety over. And now the safety and the corner that are supposed to be on one side of the field have all followed in man coverage. Oregon would run a simple zone play or, pitch play to that short side of the field, and there's no edge defender there in sight. That puts a lot of strain on the Ohio State defense. And, like the big Verdell run in that game, sort of a similar concept in the other way, right? They put an unbalanced line on that play. They motion the tight end. The safety has to account for Brown. And basically what they did is they moved everybody in the formation, all the motion and Brown are all moving to the outside of the field. They're moving to one boundary or the other. And all your safeties and some of your linebackers are having to chase those guys in man coverage. And then because that happens, you've got no safety in the middle of the field. And now you've got linebackers with a really difficult responsibility because it's, the running back's not hitting their gap anymore. That's a gap that's vacated. There's no safety help. And it busts for a big score. I do think an exacerbating problem is the fact that the defensive line is not getting push. But when you talk about those schematic issues, it creates a lot of strain. And if you're not dominant at corner and you're not dominant at the D-line, I think it's just really hard to succeed. And at some point you have to question whether this isn't just a scheme that was successful because of just how good Ohio State was in terms of talent a few years ago, and whether, with anything less than utterly dominating talent, that this scheme is just always going to struggle to be effective.
We can go back to week 1 and we saw Ohio State making hockey line changes because Minnesota was running out 13 personnel, would have 6 linemen, 7 linemen, things of that nature. Even after that game, Ryan Day said that they were going to tighten up some rotations. We go into the Oregon game, and I don't know if it was 8 linebackers that played. Heck, it could have been more. I mean, it just seemed like they were just rolling guys out, whether or not it was a case of trying to find the 2 or 3, depending on what formation they were in, guys that would work, or they just were indecisive on that. How much of a problem is it to where, you talked about on the other side of the ball, the opponent kind of dictating everything at that situation? At what point do you just sit there and say, here's our best 11, we're going to trot them out there, and players are going to have to make plays, or we're going to have to live or die with this?
I certainly think it's something you got to consider, that you got to play your best guys, right? One of my big concerns actually coming out of even the Minnesota and the Oregon game is last week's Minnesota result, right? And some people have discussed it, but Minnesota had 104 yards rushing and beat Miami of Ohio by 5 last week. I know Ibrahim is not healthy, but that line dominated Ohio State at the point of attack. And they couldn't do that against Miami of Ohio really to save their lives. I mean, they struggled to hit 3.8 yards per carry in that game. So what that tells me is that Ohio State's personnel isn't necessarily dominant. And if you take personnel that isn't necessarily dominant and you start rotating guys that are effectively backup defenders on the field, now you even have worse one-on-one matchups. And I think philosophically, it all comes down to one concept. I think Coombs is trying to kind of make sure he has a hat on a hat, man on a man all across the field. And Ohio State's approach by having this one high safety look is we're going to have the ability to stop the run, and against standard sets where people aren't doing anything fancy, maybe we have edge containment because we have more linebackers. We're never going to be in a position where they have someone that we don't have the correct counter to on the field. The problem with that is, again, you let the offense that's facing you dictate the way that you play. Alabama in the championship, I think looking at what wasn't a ton of film for Ohio State, but they saw a problem. They said, okay, if we run these formations and we run these motions, and they did a lot of stuff with like Devontae Smith motioning him back and forth across the formation, we know exactly how Ohio State's going to react. And that concept of we're just going to match them up one-on-one, it only works if your athletes are better than their athletes across the board. And not just better in terms of talent, but better in terms of execution, better in terms of experience. And even then, I think what Alabama and Oregon have shown is, but even there, the best athlete one-on-one can't necessarily win if he's put in an unfavorable position, and we can guarantee that you're in an unfavorable position. So I think the reality for Ohio State is you need to focus on getting your best players on the field. And I think there has to be a lot more either in terms of zone defense or pattern match, which is what Alabama runs, where the assignments are what change, not necessarily the alignment. So if I'm, if Oregon trots out an extra tight end or receiver, it's not that I rush out another linebacker or another corner or another safety, and then I move the safeties to match them where I'm just mirroring their offensive set. Rather, I have my best players in the field. I shift slightly to compensate, but more than anything, I look at the routes they're running, I look at their leverage, and I let my coverage sort of change their assignments based on that leverage. So, for example, I don't let my safety and corner vacate the short side of the field, right? Maybe I have a linebacker on a corner, and this is my point. Coombs has to be willing to let that matchup be disadvantageous, because that way the offense isn't dictating what you're doing. You keep leverage on the other side. You maybe give up a disadvantageous matchup, but you got to trust your guys to be good enough in that situation. And if they've got leverage, I think they can be successful. So in my view, I think that's what Ohio State really has to go to defensively. And it's definitely a lot of added complexity. And I think that's the challenge. I mean, one thing, so that's all of one thing that's going on. But I think the other thing is, maybe we should return to it, is this concept of, are you trying to stop them from getting 4 yards every play? Or are you trying to limit the damage between the middle of the field and stop them in the red zone? And that's also a whole other can of worms that I don't think Coombs adjusted to.
A lot of us are looking for ways to start our day feeling more joy and appreciation. And while some of us write gratitude lists or do yoga, others pour themselves a bowl of their favorite cereal, Honey Nut Cheerios. Because not only are Honey Nut Cheerios delicious, they can help lower cholesterol as part of a heart-healthy diet. So maybe the secret to a great mood all day is a little yoga, then writing your gratitude list over a bowl of Honey Nut Cheerios. Learn more about a heart-healthy lifestyle at Cheerios.com.
Check out the latest footwear innovation from Adidas, the Adizero Adios Pro 2, which features carbon fiber energy rods that are both lightweight and precisely tuned for a more anatomical transition. Everything from the ultra-light polyester upper to the resculpted midsole and the reinvented outsoles are designed for speed. Visit adidas.com to learn more today.
The perfect campaign is the perfect music. That's why Premium Beat tracks are produced by award-winning musicians at world-class studios. Plus, our license gives you tracks for a lifetime. Pay once and never again. Save 25% on your next track at premiumbeat.com/royalty-free/podcast.
We know how hard it is, and we're going to wrap up here after this one, or maybe one more after it. We know how hard it is to fix the engines on a plane when you're at 35,000 feet. So we're in the season right now. You can't do a teardown. Ohio State has games the next 4 weeks, starting with Tulsa on Saturday, and then has an open week before the second half of the season, and a road trip at Indiana's there. How difficult of a job is it going to be to fix this with just, the NC2A has limits on how much practice you can have. You have 2 days of really hitting and then more just kind of walkthrough type of stuff. And, you kind of mentioned a couple of things there, but what are some easy things, or I don't know, easy is not the right word. What are some things that they can do briefly that they can do to try and turn the tide a little bit? Because obviously at this point, I mean, if you go back to the Alabama game, just the amount of points that they've given up in their last 3 games. I mean, they still gave up a bunch of points to Clemson, but the offense was just so good in that game. And Clemson, when they lost Skalski and everything else, kind of just wasn't able to hang with them. What can they do to right the ship on defense?
I think the biggest thing they can do to right the ship is, honestly, it's just to adjust to simpler principles and try to keep 2 safeties more often than not. For most teams Ohio State plays, your athletes are going to be better than the athletes you're going up against. And if you just run, basic, either man coverage with 2 over the top or cover 2 total zone, you're going to have the ability to stop most teams. And if Ohio State was sitting in zone coverage, particularly in the short side of the field, in the red zone, I think they would have had a lot more success, because they would have been able to keep numbers or someone to deal with those just edge run plays on a consistent basis. I don't have much of a better answer for that, because the things that you really ought to do in man schemes are not easily taught. Alabama has made this transition in the RPO era of really adding more complexity to their pattern match principles, and it's proven to be a bit of a problem for them. It used to be they did a lot of, when you say pattern match, what that means is you look at the alignment of the receivers, and then based off that alignment, your coverage responsibilities, if you're a safety or a corner, aren't really set even until the guy starts running a route. And based off the routes that are running, you're constantly switching. So as a guy motions across the field, that assignment of who's carrying him changes as he motions. You don't follow him across the formation. It's just the responsibility changes, which means there has to be a lot of communication and understanding so you don't bust that. And then once they start running a route, Alabama actually determines who's going to cover as the route develops. So they're switching on the fly as the route's going on. They've added another layer of complexity, because now they use the outside linebackers for those swing plays to running backs or tight ends. Now, a lot of times the outside linebacker, even on the line of scrimmage, is picking them up. That's kind of where football seems to be heading, and that's where Pete Golding is trying to take Alabama. But their problem has been teaching those concepts in a reliable manner has proven extremely hard. The first half of the season, their defenses have not looked great because they're making busts. This is a lot of thinking pre-snap and post-snap that has to happen, and it's really easy to bust coverage. Ohio State can't make that change live. And so I think at this point, you have to accept the fact that you're going to be limited in how effective you can be. And so I think you have to play more just basic principles, and you have to go back to making sure that the offense isn't dictating you and trust in your guys to be able to make a play. And I'll go back to the point I was making about Ohio State offensively earlier. If you accept that you're not going to do great between the 20s and the RPO, then you can sort of punt on that until you get in the red zone. And early in the game, Ohio State had a couple times when they turned over on downs. I'm looking right now, the stat sheet for about 5 minutes left in the second quarter. Ohio State has a run for 21 yards, right? They had complete a pass to 13 yards. And just like we're talking about, now they're at the Oregon side of the field on the 47. They go incomplete, 4-yard run, 4-yard completion, run for no gain. What happened when they got to about the Oregon 40? Oregon changed up their defense, tightened up, played more aggressively, and stopped them. And I think that's the game plan for Ohio State. We're going to play back. We're going to be loose. We know we're going to give up yards up until our side of the field at the very least, but somewhere around the 40 to 20-yard line, then we'll be a little bit more aggressive. Then I don't think you can be total just man up and give the edge like they've been doing, but you can play more tight man coverage. You can walk your safety up in the box because you don't have this threat to be beat deep. But if you try to hold teams to 2 yards of play in the middle of the field against RPO schemes with this level of predictability, I just don't think it's ever going to be successful.
Last question. I really appreciate you joining us, Josh. Once again, he's half of the College Football Nerds. Be sure to give him a follow. I watch as much of their content as I can. Have you pulling out the crystal ball here? Just based on what you've seen out of 2 games from Ohio State, based out of what you've seen out of the conference at this point, we still haven't seen Penn State take on Auburn. Some of these other games, there's still some marquee non-conference games. Does Ohio State win the Big Ten East this year? Just based on what you've seen, what you think that their potential is, do they have a shot of going to Indianapolis and competing for a Big Ten championship?
I think I would still put it as more likely than not that Ohio State wins the Big East championship. I mean, we didn't dock Ohio State that much in our rankings. We took flack. It was kind of funny because we had them around 6th nationally to start the year because of all the losses, because of all the new faces and what we saw as some of these deficiencies. And I think sometimes when people get too high on a team preseason and it doesn't go the way they expect, they get too negative afterwards. Ohio State is still by far the most talented team in the Big Ten. Ohio State still has an offense that's capable of being extremely explosive. CJ Stroud, we were really skeptical of him early in the year because we watched the spring game. We felt like the consistency wasn't there. I think we saw that in Minnesota. We saw that a little bit with Oregon. I thought there was a big improvement from Minnesota to Oregon, frankly. I thought Minnesota, he was a little skittish. He hit some big plays, but that Minnesota defense is not very good, frankly. Oregon, those weren't as available, but he was still fairly effective. I think as the year goes along, you're going to see a very different side of Stroud. And when his comfort level develops and you hit the routine play, because you're going to have some routine scoring plays for big yardage with Wilson and Olave, and especially if you can leverage the remaining depth of that receiving core, which is insane, you're going to be able to put up more points on a consistent basis. And again, an elite RPO offense, we say this all the time, can generally put up 40 points against everybody. And if Ohio State puts up 40 points, this defense is good enough to hold, I think, Penn State, whose offense is not great, and Michigan, who looks better, but I still don't think is necessarily great yet. They're just a good team maybe this year. I don't really see anybody else on the schedule. Rutgers, Maryland, Indiana, none of these teams really scare me that much offensively. I know you had issues with Indiana last year, but I think that was a little bit of a fluke. I think Ohio State can easily win the Big East, and I think Ohio State will end the year a lot better than they began it. This would be my sort of comeback on that. Ultimately, 2014 and 2015, Alabama made the playoffs, and Ohio State came out and shocked Alabama 2014, 2015, Alabama wins the championship. But let's not forget that Alabama lost to not phenomenal Ole Miss teams in both of those years, in 14 and 15. 14, they lose to Bo Wallace, right? So these things happen. Teams lose games. 2014, Ohio State with a new quarterback lost to Virginia Tech early in the year. in JT Barrett. I want to say that was his second start, right? Was a completely different player, completely different level of efficiency at the end of the year. Ohio State is going to become a team a lot more similar to what people expected them to be. I think people just really had unrealistic expectations of how good they would be with the amount of roster turnover they had early in the year against, an Oregon team that's really good and a Minnesota team that's extremely experienced. That's going to balance out by the end of the season.
There you have it. I can't say I disagree with anything you said there. Once again, I want to thank Josh from College Football Nerds for joining us. I'll make sure that I have their information in our description on the YouTube channel. Be sure to give them a subscribe and hit the bell so you can see their new content when it comes up. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell so you can see our new content when it comes up. But I hope to have Josh or Daniel on later in the season because I really enjoy their content. So, Josh, thanks again for being part of the show.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for listening to my long-winded thoughts.
Absolutely. People are going to love it. And, be sure to let us know down in the comments. And once again, this is Kevin Noon for the Big Me Kickoff. We will talk to you again very soon.
Today, I want to tell you about a simple way to get all the entertainment you love without the hassle. DirecTV Stream brings your live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before, which means you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. And the best part? There's no annual contract. So stop waiting and get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more at directtv.com. That's directtv.com. Compatible device required. Content varies by package.
Check out the latest footwear innovation from Adidas, the Adizero Adios Pro 2, which features carbon fiber energy rods that are both lightweight and precisely tuned for a more anatomical transition. Everything from the ultra-light polyester upper to the re-sculpted midsole and the reinvented outsoles are designed for speed. Visit adidas.com to learn more today. Check out the latest footwear innovation from Adidas, the Adizero Adios Pro 2, which features carbon fiber energy rods that are both lightweight and precisely tuned for a more anatomical transition. Everything from the ultra-light polyester upper to the re-sculpted midsole and the reinvented outsoles are designed for speed. Visit adidas.com to learn more today. Check out the latest footwear innovation from Adidas, the Adizero Adios Pro 2, which features carbon fiber energy rods that are both lightweight and precisely tuned for a more anatomical transition. Everything from the ultra-light polyester upper to the re-sculpted midsole and the reinvented outsoles are designed for speed. Visit adidas.com to learn more today. Check out the latest footwear innovation from Adidas, the Adizero Adios Pro 2, which features carbon fiber energy rods that are both lightweight and precisely tuned for a more anatomical transition. Everything from the ultra-light polyester upper to the re-sculpted midsole and the reinvented outsoles are designed for speed. Visit adidas.com to learn more today.